On the busiest morning of his life, a young man stood at the edge of destiny. With an interview that could lift him out of poverty just minutes away, every second mattered. But fate threw him a cruel choice. An old man collapsed in the middle of the street, begging silently for help. Strangers walked past, too rushed or too blind to care. He froze, heart pounding, torn between his future and his humanity. One choice meant security, the other meant sacrifice. He didn't know that missing this interview would change everything, because the fragile old man he chose to help wasn't just anyone. He was the very CEO who held his future in his hands. The city was already awake before the sun climbed over the skyline. Cars pressed their horns impatiently, buses groaned at every stop, and the scent of roasted coffee beans drifted from corner cafes where early risers queued for their daily fuel. In the heart of this restless city lived a young man named Darius. Darius was 24, tall, lean, and restless, with a quiet fire in his eyes that spoke of dreams far bigger than the tiny room he rented in a crumbling apartment block. The peeling paint on the walls and the hum of an overworked radiator were daily reminders of how far he was from the life he wanted. Yet, every morning he rose before dawn, lacing up worn-out shoes, carrying a second-hand briefcase that looked almost too fragile to hold weight. Life had not been gentle with Darius. He was raised in a neighborhood where ambition often suffocated beneath hardship. His mother worked endless hours as a cleaner, scrubbing offices until her hands were cracked and raw, while his father disappeared when he was just a boy. That absence became a silent weight he carried into adulthood, shaping him into a man who learned to depend on no one but himself. Still, Darius had dreams, the kind that made him sit by his window at night, gazing at glittering skyscrapers in the distance. To him, those buildings weren't just structures of glass and steel. They were monuments of possibility. Inside those walls were lives of comfort, security, and dignity. Things he longed not only for himself, but for the mother who had sacrificed everything to raise him. When the letter of invitation for a job interview arrived, it felt like destiny finally whispering his name. The company was no ordinary place. It was one of the most prestigious firms in the city, a powerhouse of innovation and influence. To secure a position there meant more than a paycheck. It meant stability, respect, and the chance to rewrite his family's story. He had prepared relentlessly. Every evening after working part-time shifts at a warehouse, Darius would sit at his small desk, studying the company's history, memorizing facts, rehearsing answers in front of a cracked mirror. He ironed his only suit with careful hands, ensuring each crease was sharp, as if precision itself could will him into success. He polished his shoes until they shone, though their leather was already tired from years of use. On the morning of the interview, he rose earlier than usual. His mother had already left for work, leaving behind a small breakfast of bread and tea with a handwritten note that simply read, "I believe in you." He held on to that note as if it were an amulet, the phi. City streets outside were unforgiving, but Darius moved through them with determination. Every stoplight felt like a test, every delay a reminder of how fragile time could be. The bus he boarded was crowded, filled with faces weary from night shifts and early commutes. He clutched the handlebar, swaying with each turn, his mind replaying the lines he had practiced. Confidence battled with anxiety in his chest, but he told himself over and over, "Today is the day everything changes." He arrived downtown with minutes to spare, the towering skyscrapers casting long shadows across the pavement. His destination was just a few blocks away, a building so sleek and imposing it seemed to mock his nervous stride. He checked his watch repeatedly, each glance making his pulse race faster. The interview was scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp, and he knew that punctuality was not just preferred, it was demanded. But then fate intervened. As Darius hurried along the busy street, his thoughts consumed by the weight of the opportunity ahead, he noticed a disturbance just a few steps ahead. An elderly man had collapsed near the curb, his cane lying beside him, his body trembling as if drained of all strength. Pedestrians slowed down but did not stop. Some glanced in pity, others avoided eye contact altogether, their pace quickening as though compassion were too costly to spare. Darius froze for a moment, torn between instinct and responsibility. The interview, the future, the sacrifices of his mother, the countless hours of preparation, all of it hung in the balance. If he stopped now, he would almost certainly be late. If he walked on, he might secure the very chance he had been waiting for all his life. The world seemed to hold its breath. His heart thundered in his chest, each beat echoing the impossible choice before him. He didn't yet know who that man was. To him, the old man was just another stranger on a city street. But sometimes destiny disguises itself in the most ordinary forms, testing character in ways no resume or degree ever could. And as the clock ticked closer to 9, Darius found himself standing at the crossroads of sacrifice and ambition, unaware that whichever path he chose would alter his life forever. Darius stood frozen, staring at the frail figure on the ground. The sound of the city seemed to dull, as though the world around him had been muffled, leaving only the thundering of his own heartbeat. The man's cane lay at an awkward angle, his trembling hands clutching at the pavement as if it might anchor him against the weakness pulling him down. A wave of urgency pressed against Darius's chest. His watch ticked relentlessly, each passing second stealing away his chance at the interview. He pictured the company's reception desk, the line of sharply dressed candidates waiting, the clock striking 9, and the seat he had fought so hard for suddenly gone. This was the moment he had prepared his whole life for, yet here was a stranger collapsing in front of him, pulling him in a direction that could cost him everything. For a fleeting second, he almost walked on. His legs twitched with the urge to move forward, to prioritize ambition, to honor the years of sacrifice his mother had endured. But his eyes lingered on the old man's face, pale, strained, eyes pleading without words. Something inside Darius twisted, a part of him too deeply rooted in compassion to ignore suffering. With a deep breath, he crouched beside the man. The air was thick with the exhaust of passing cars and the indifference of rushing pedestrians, but Darius's world had narrowed to this one fragile life. He lifted the man gently, steadying him with an arm, and guided him toward a bench nearby. The weight of the man was surprisingly heavy, his body frail but unyielding, and each step was slower than the impatient clock demanded. The minutes slipped away, unnoticed by everyone but Darius. He dabbed at the man's sweat-dampened forehead with his own handkerchief, the fabric absorbing both worry and determination. A passing stranger glanced at them with mild annoyance, muttering under their breath about being in the way before hurrying off. Darius ignored it. His focus remained on the shallow rise and fall of the old man's chest, willing stability back into his frail frame. A taxi idled at the curb. Darius waved it down and carefully helped the man inside. The driver looked irritated at first, but Darius slid in beside the man, supporting him upright with one steady arm. He instructed the driver to head toward the nearest clinic. The streets blurred past, skyscrapers flashing like reminders of what he was leaving behind. The weight of sacrifice settled on his shoulders, heavy and undeniable. At the clinic, the process was slow and exhausting. Paperwork, waiting lines, the shuffle of nurses moving at their own pace. Darius remained by the man's side, ensuring he was hydrated, encouraging him to breathe steadily, keeping him from slipping into unconsciousness. Every tick of the clock felt like a hammer striking his hopes. He pictured the interview panel, beginning without him, the receptionist marking his absence, his name fading from the list of possibilities. Yet, despite the rising panic, he stayed. Something told him this mattered, not for recognition, not for reward, but because it was. Right, to walk away would have been a betrayal of his very humanity, and if he had to choose between ambition and compassion, then he would live with the consequences. Hours stretched on. By the time the doctors assured Darius the old man would be fine, the interview had long passed. Relief washed over him, but it was laced with dread. He had missed it. The opportunity he had clung to, rehearsed for, and sacrificed so much to pursue was gone. He walked out of the clinic feeling hollow, his shoes scraping against the tiled floor as though they carried the weight of failure. The sunlight outside felt harsher now, less hopeful, and the bustling city no longer inspired him. It mocked him. His briefcase hung at his side, unopened, its prepared documents useless. He stood at the curb for a long time, letting the reality sink in. He had chosen compassion, and in doing so, had closed the door to his future. But life has a way of weaving unseen patterns where choices that feel like losses are, in truth, setting the stage for something greater. That evening, Darius returned home exhausted. His mother noticed the slump of his shoulders, the way his usual spark seemed dimmed. He didn't have the heart to explain the full story yet. Instead, he sat at his small desk, staring at the city lights flickering through his window, his mind replaying the day. He told himself over and over that he had done the right thing, but fear gnawed at him. What if kindness had cost him everything? The next morning, whispers spread through the corporate world. Rumors circulated about a CEO who had collapsed on the street and been helped by a stranger. The story was piecing itself together, but Darius didn't yet know that the old man he had saved was not merely a random figure. He was the very man whose company he had been desperate to join. Destiny had a strange sense of irony. And as the days passed, the choice that had seemed like a failure began to unfold into something far greater than Darius could have imagined. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Darius carried himself through them, like a man walking with weights strapped to his ankles. The interview he had prepared for had passed without him. Each morning, he looked at his suit hanging neatly in the corner of his room, a painful reminder of what could have been. His friends and neighbors asked casually if he had heard back from the company, and he forced a smile, swallowing the ache in his chest. At night, he lay awake, replaying his choice. He remembered the look of fear on the old man's face, the way his body trembled, the relief when the doctors had taken over. Those memories gave him some comfort, whispering that he had done the right thing. But still, doubt lingered. Had kindness ruined him? 1 week later, an unexpected letter arrived. The envelope bore the company's crest, bold and unmistakable. Darius stared at it in disbelief, his hands trembling as he tore it open. Inside was not a rejection, nor a polite dismissal, but an invitation. He was being summoned to the company headquarters for a special evaluation. Confusion mingled with hope. He couldn't understand how, after missing the interview, they still wanted to see him. Perhaps it was a mistake or some administrative oversight. Yet the letter was clear, formal, and undeniable. His heart pounded as he read the address again and again. On the appointed day, Darius dressed in his suit once more. It no longer felt like armor, but like a second chance stitched together in fabric. He polished his shoes until the leather reflected. His face straightened his tie and clutched his briefcase. This time, he left earlier than ever, determined not to let fate intervene again. The company headquarters loomed larger than he remembered. Its glass facade reflected the morning sun, giving it an almost ethereal glow. Inside, the lobby buzzed with movement, employees hurrying between meetings, receptionists answering calls, security guards monitoring the entrance. Darius felt small against the vastness of it all, but he squared his shoulders and approached the front desk with the letter in hand. The receptionist scanned the paper, then her expression shifted from polite detachment to quiet surprise. Without a word, she directed him toward a private elevator. The doors closed behind him, the numbers climbing higher and higher, until they stopped at the very top floor. The elevator opened into a space unlike anything Darius had seen. It was expansive, with polished floors that gleamed under soft lighting. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, offering a view that seemed to stretch into infinity. At the center of the room sat a grand oak desk, and behind it, the old man. Darius froze. His breath caught in his throat. The frail figure he had carried to safety, the stranger he had believed was simply another vulnerable soul in the city, now sat upright with dignity, dressed in a tailored suit, his cane resting nearby. His eyes, sharp and clear now, fixed on Darius with recognition. The old man smiled faintly, as if this meeting had been inevitable. And in that moment, realization crashed down on Darius. This was the CEO. The man he had been preparing to impress at the interview. The man whose name was etched into the very foundation of the company. For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the faint hum of the city below. Darius's pulse thundered in his ears. He wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize for missing the interview, but no words came. The weight of disbelief pressed against his chest. Then, as if to confirm the impossible, the old man leaned back in his chair, studying Darius with quiet intensity. He did not need an introduction. The recognition was already there. The CEO rose slowly, his cane tapping against the floor as he walked closer. Every step echoed in the grand office, magnifying the gravity of the moment. He stopped just a few feet from Darius, his expression solemn, but not unkind. It was as though he carried the memory of that day, not as a moment of weakness, but as a test that had revealed something rare. Around them, the silence was absolute. The city might have roared outside those windows, but within this room, time seemed to have paused. The CEO gestured toward the city skyline, then back at Darius. His gaze spoke volumes. This was not just about a job interview anymore. It was about character. About the kind of person who chose humanity over ambition, integrity over convenience. For the first time since that fateful day, Darius felt the burden on his shoulders lift. The sacrifice that had haunted him no longer seemed like a loss. He had missed the interview, yes. But in doing so, he had unknowingly proven something far greater than any resume could capture. The CEO returned to his desk, but his eyes never left Darius. On the polished surface lay a single folder, marked with Darius's name. With a steady hand, the old man pushed it forward. Inside that folder was an offer letter. Not for an entry-level position, not for the chance he thought he had lost, but for something greater. A role designed specifically for him, a recognition of his potential and his values. Darius's breath caught. His vision blurred with disbelief. He had walked into the building expecting rejection, perhaps pity, but what he found instead was opportunity beyond anything he had imagined. This was the moment where everything turned. Where what seemed like failure revealed itself as destiny, where compassion became the key to a door that ambition alone could never have opened. And as Darius stood in that office, staring at the man who had once seemed like a stranger in need, he realized that his act of kindness had not ruined him. It had saved him. Darius left the CEO's office that day with his mind spinning. The letter in his hands felt heavier than any weight he had ever carried, not because of the paper itself, but because of what it represented. Opportunity, security, validation, and above all, the proof that sacrifice, even when it seemed foolish, could blossom into reward. He walked through the glass building's lobby in a daze, the polished floors and rushing employees suddenly looking different to him. A week ago, he had entered these doors with trembling hands, desperate to cling to one fragile chance. Now he left them not as a hopeful candidate, but as someone chosen for something greater. On the street outside, the city's noise returned. In full force, taxis blaring, vendors shouting, pedestrians weaving hurriedly. Yet Darius felt insulated in a bubble of clarity. He had lived his life believing success was only measured by seizing every opportunity with relentless drive. But now he understood something deeper. Success was also about humanity, about holding on to integrity, even when it meant personal cost. The days that followed moved quickly. The company wasted no time integrating him into his new role. His position was tailored not just to his academic skills, but to his character. He was placed in a leadership program designed to cultivate individuals with vision and compassion. Many of his peers looked at him with curiosity, wondering how someone who hadn't even made it to the official interview was given such an opportunity. Whispers circled, but Darius carried himself with quiet humility. He knew his journey wasn't about luck, but about a choice he had made when no one was watching. For his mother, the transformation was overwhelming. When Darius came home with the news, her tired hands trembled as she held the letter. Years of sacrifice, of long nights spent cleaning offices that didn't belong to her, now felt worth it. She cried openly, not from sadness but from the release of a lifetime of worry. To her, this wasn't just her son's victory, it was her own. But the impact extended beyond Darius and his family. The story began to spread quietly within the company, then beyond. Employees learned how the CEO had been helped by a young man who had missed his own interview to do the right thing. For many, it became more than just an anecdote. It was a reminder of the values that corporations often forgot: integrity, compassion, humanity. The CEO himself referenced Darius in meetings, not by name at first, but by the lesson his actions carried. He spoke of how true leadership is measured not by ambition alone, but by the willingness to put others first when it matters most. Eventually, when the story became public, Darius's name was attached, and his journey became a source of inspiration. In his neighborhood, people who had once doubted him began to look at him differently. The same streets that had whispered about failure now buzzed with pride. Young kids saw him not just as someone who had escaped hardship, but as proof that character mattered. Parents pointed to him as an example, reminding their children that kindness was not weakness, but strength in its truest form. As months turned into years, Darius grew within the company. Each new responsibility tested him, each challenge demanding more than just knowledge. They required empathy, patience, and vision. And time and again, he drew from the lesson of that one morning, that life was not simply about chasing opportunity, but about recognizing the unseen value in doing the right thing. The CEO, who had once been the fragile old man on the street, became a mentor to Darius. Their bond was not one of employer and employee alone, but of two men forever connected by fate. The CEO often reminded him that in the moment of greatest vulnerability, Darius had not hesitated to act, and that was the kind of instinct no resume could measure. For Darius, the true impact of his decision revealed itself not just in promotions or recognition, but in the quiet moments. The smile of his mother when she no longer had to work endless hours, the nods of respect from colleagues who had once doubted him, the gratitude of strangers who heard his story and were inspired to act with kindness themselves. Looking back, Darius often thought about the crossroads of that morning, the ticking clock, the interview he never attended, the old man on the ground. He realized that his life could have split in two very different directions depending on his choice. One path might have led to success through ambition, but it would have cost him a piece of his soul. The other, the one he chose, seemed at first like failure, but it carried him into a destiny he could never have imagined. The impact rippled outward. His story reached schools, churches, and community centers, shared as a lesson to young people who struggled with their own choices. Do the right thing, even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. Those words became the moral that carried his story beyond his city, inspiring people far and wide. And through it all, Darius never let pride consume him. He wore success with humility, remembering always that his journey began not with triumph, but with sacrifice. His life became a living testament to the truth that greatness is not built on ambition alone, but on the courage to choose compassion in moments of crisis. In the end, Darius had not just earned a position at a powerful company. He had earned something far greater: respect, dignity, and a legacy that would endure. His story was proof that sometimes the doors we think we have lost are not the end, but the beginning of paths we were always meant to walk. And so, the young man who once feared that kindness had ruined him came to understand the deeper truth. Kindness had saved him, elevated him, and set him on a path where his dreams could flourish not just for himself, but for everyone who looked to him as proof that humanity still mattered.